Swithun Wells was born in 1536 in Hampshire, the sixth child of Thomas Wells of Bambridge Hall. The Welleses were a wealthy country family who had remained loyal to the Catholic faith after King Henry VIII had broken away from Rome and declared himself supreme head of the Church in England just 2 years earlier. Swithun was given a good education and grew up enjoying sports such as hunting and falconry with friends, as well as writing poetry and playing music. After his time in Italy, he could speak and write Italian. Returned to England, Swithun settled into the quiet life of a country gentleman. As the youngest son, he wouldn't inherit the family property, but he maintained himself by becoming a private tutor to the family of the Earl of Southampton, who was a Catholic. The Earl's eldest son, Henry Wriothesley, later became the patron of William Shakespeare. Shakespeare is known to have moved in Catholic circles, and some scholars think that he himself was a Catholic. So perhaps Swithun met the young Shakespeare. Later, he married a devout Catholic lady called Alice. To support his family, he opened a secret Catholic school at Monkton Farley in Wiltshire. Here, he tutored many young men who would go on to become priests, and in some cases, martyrs. He ran the school for over 20 years and was part of the network of lay Catholics offering safe houses to priests as they moved about the country. But in 1582, the government heard of his activities and ordered a search for him. He closed the school and even attended Anglican services for a while, although he was soon reconciled to the Catholic Church again. In 1585, aged 46 and having run out of money, Swithun moved to London, taking a house in Holborn near Gray's Inn Fields. Some houses from this period still exist there today. Swithun and Alice used this house as a safe place for Catholic priests to stay and to say Mass. The following year he was arrested twice, but was released on bail provided by his nephew. Later he undertook a mission to Rome on behalf of the Earl of Southampton, his former employer. But the priest hunters were always on the watch. On the 8th of November 1591, a number of priests had made their way to Swithun's house to say Mass, including the future saints Edmund Jennings and Polydore Plasden. Swithun himself was away from home, but his wife Anne was there in the congregation with other lay people. We heard in our previous episodes about St. Edmund Jennings and St. Polydore Plasden about the dramatic events which followed, how the priest hunters, led by the infamous Richard Topcliffe, arrived at the house while Mass was being said, but were held at bay by Catholic laymen with swords until it was over. They were then all arrested, including Alice. Next day, Swithun returned home and found what had happened. He went straight to the authorities and demanded the release of his wife. But instead, Swithun was arrested himself and sent to Newgate Prison. His trial and execution were soon to follow. The majority of the 40 martyrs were priests, because it was illegal to be one. And Swithun Wells is one of a handful of lay people. To what extent do you think he's still a role model for lay people today?
Yeah, I think he's a really important model, and he's a very interesting character because part of his vocation clearly was to support priests, and he was eventually arrested because he and his family were harbouring priests in his house. So that was obviously a key part of his vocation. So that the way in which lay people and priests were working together, I think, is really significant there. But he also had his own vocation as well as a school teacher, and that went on for years. And I think that's very interesting that he stuck to that through thick and thin. And I think it's very hard for us today to imagine the sheer pressure that someone like St. Swithun Wells was under for so long. and to be able to continue to teach and to teach the truth and to teach the truths of the church while under that intense pressure, I think is really interesting and really important for us to remember. I think the other thing that strikes me about him was that he's not a cardboard cutout saint. He was under pressure, and for a short while he seems to have capitulated to the authorities. He attended the Church of England services, but then he pulled back from that. He was reconciled with the church. So that ability to fall and then pick yourself up again, to move on and to eventually die the martyr's death, I think is really quite inspiring.
But it also makes him more human.
Absolutely, and I think it can be difficult for us to see these remarkable saints and think, well, that was then, but our lives are different, our situations are different. But they were ordinary people like us, but doing extraordinary things.
Swithun was charged with harbouring priests. At his trial on the 5th of December 1591, he denied being at the house when Mass was being said, but declared that he wished he had been. He was condemned to die alongside Father Edmund Jennings on a scaffold which was to be erected outside his own house. Swithun Wells was 55, an old man by the standards of the day. On the morning of the 10th of December, Swithun was dragged on a hurdle to Gray's Inn Fields. On the way, he noticed a friend in the crowd and called out cheerfully, "Farewell, dear friend. Farewell all hawking, hunting, and old pastimes. I am now going a better way." At the gallows, he first had to watch Father Jennings being butchered. The priest screamed in agony, but Swithun comforted him. "Thy pain is great indeed, but almost past. Pray for me now, most holy saint, that mine may come." As Swithun was waiting to be executed, the priest hunter Topcliffe taunted him, saying, "You see now what your priests have brought you to." Swithun replied, "I am very glad and give great thanks to God, and look upon myself exceeding happy that I have been so far favoured as to have received many and such like priests under my roof." He then suffered the same savage death. His wife Alice was spared execution, but later died in prison.